right, well, thank you all for being here today. We are excited for our Blue Tech panel. We have an amazing panel, and thank you all for being here. And Laine, thank you for joining us from across the ocean. It's delightful to see you, and I'll let you know it's a great room. You are very present. You're not too big, but you're big enough. So it is a really nice room to be able to do this hybrid approach. So our goal for today is to begin to kind of put an umbrella around what might be blue tech. First off, to define what blue technology is, define the opportunity for North Carolina and beyond, as we said in the title of the panel. But to think about at Carolina, what do we have in terms of assets and resources that are going to provide value in this realm and also provide opportunities for students, really important. And so this is the beginning of what we're calling our Blue Tech Student Initiative. And in the fall, or I'm sorry, in the spring, we're going to follow up with a Blue Technology contest. So more look in all these spaces in the spring associated with the Clean Tech Summit. We're going to have a sort of Shark Tank-like competition, and we're really excited about that. So we're trying to define a community, and we're trying to shine a light on what may be opportunities for students in an area that not everybody necessarily knows about. So we have remarkable folks with us here today to do those things. We want to thank Nancy and Monty White, supporters of the Institute, who provide the resources to give you all lunch today. So enjoy it. Enjoy the baklava if you haven't already. It's delicious. And we're really grateful to have a really broad subsection of the approaching 100 or so people who registered. We have people from within environmental sciences, within geography, within the business school, across the university. The dark blue team down the road is represented. So we're excited to have this be not only a Carolina thing for environment related stuff, since we're the Institute of the Environment, but doing what we do best, which is cutting across the university. So in that note, thank you again for joining us. And I think it would be a great time to introduce our panelists. So Joel, if you would start off, please, and let us know where you come from and what you're bringing today.
Hi, everybody. My name is Joel. I'm a faculty member at Carolina's Marine Lab. Carolina has had a marine lab at the coast for almost 80 years, and I'm a coastal ecologist. I study the fishes and the crabs and the shrimps and the habitats. And over the last 10 years, I've been engaged with sort of aquaculture research, so the growing of foods on leases and whatnot, and also sort of fisheries policy in terms of aspects of how the state is performing and managing its fisheries. And I'm, as I told Mike, I'm here. I wanted to be here to learn. So this is a great opportunity for me to understand how, like, a marine lab can be more engaged in things like the blue economy and blue tech.
Matt, please introduce yourself.
Matt Campbell. I am an entrepreneur in the blue tech space. I'm on my fourth blue tech startup. All of them have revolved around how do you use the ocean space to protect communities, provide for communities. That's kind of the basis of the need that's out there. And then the technology and the services that we're providing are helping those communities thrive. And so my current company is Oceans 2050. We're looking at the blue tech or the blue industry space as more of a real estate. How do we view this as real estate? How does that provide value to the locals? And then how do you develop projects that will enhance the environment as well as the local economy? And so I can talk a little bit more about that, but my background is in coastal and biological engineering. So coming at it from an engineering perspective, we've developed various technologies. My last company was called Natrix. We had 3D printing technology that would recreate reefs and biomimic various habitats in the ocean space. So that's
perfect.
Area.
Awesome. All right, Laine, thank you so much. So Laine is studying abroad and is joining us from across the Atlantic. So Laine, where are you today?
I'm in Edinburgh, Scotland. So I'm sorry I couldn't be there with you guys, but it's dark and gloomy over here. So it's not a little envious. But yeah, I'm Laine Cammack. I'm a senior here at UNC. I'm majoring in environmental studies and public policy with a focus on sustainability. This past summer through the Pavel Molchanov Scholars Program, I worked with our next panelist, Mark Huang, at LongLeaf Studios, which I'm sure you'll hear a bit more about in a second. But my role there, alongside another brilliant intern from Duke, was to map out the emerging blue tech research and innovation ecosystem across North Carolina, which involved looking deeper into our respective schools programs, as well as innovative startups like Matt's. We looked at Natrix and Oceans 2050 and interesting ones like that. So this experience really gave me a broader understanding of how this new blue economy is growing worldwide, but also how North Carolina is uniquely positioned to take charge in the industry expansion, led in large part by our experts at schools here at UNC Chapel Hill. I'm certainly not one of them, so I'm also coming to this panel with the expectation to learn a lot, and I'm glad to be here and excited to share my perspectives from the student side of things.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Laine. And Mark, the aforementioned Mark Huang. Mark is going to introduce himself, and Mark is also going to introduce this topic. Before we do that, I'm going to remedy something that has become my habit. I forgot to introduce myself. My name is Mike Piehler. I'm the director of the Institute for the Environment. I'm super happy to be moderating this panel here today. So Mark, if you would, go ahead and introduce yourself, and then we've got your few slides queued up to get us level set.
Okay, yeah. Hi, Mark Huang. I've been in the North Carolina area about 5-6 years. Before that, I was a co-founder of See Ahead, and See Ahead is maybe not the, but one of the first focused ocean, we call it the Blue Tech incubators, out of Boston. And then the gist essentially was that we didn't want the ocean. We saw an opportunity, and we didn't want the ocean to always be an afterthought. We wanted to be ocean centric first, and then go out. So prior to Blue Tech, about 15 years in clean tech, the first batteries, renewable energy, LED lighting, from a corporate and a venture perspective. My linkage to the ocean, so you have to have some little bit of cred. We formed CAD with, I studied marine engineering and naval architecture. So when I was a kid, I never outgrew ships and fascinated with the ocean. So that was how it came full circle a few decades later, where I'm like, back on the ocean economy, all this opportunity and potential of more entrepreneurship tied to ocean, both sustainability, getting that double bottom line of economic growth.
Awesome. Emily, what's our best way to drive the slides?
Just, Mark, if you want to stand up and just tap the arrows. We have to click on the screen first to get it to.
So I'm gonna all right. So this is a construct of blue tech, not the construct of blue tech, right? So I want to emphasize, people will say, what is it? What does it mean? So like Michael noted, this is just a level set. It opens up a discussion. There's different ways of cutting and slicing and dicing, but a couple of high level points was when we formed See Ahead, we were hanging out in if you know Boston, Kendall Square, where all the startups were, and we were being told, it's like, why aren't you down at Cape Cod with that big Oceanographic Institute, right? That we all know. It's like, that's where the marine scientists are. And the answer to that was because we saw the opportunity is we weren't marine scientists, but we saw this opportunity where all this advanced tech, some of it deep tech, was happening in an area like Boston, Cambridge, and we wanted to provide a bridge. So that means marine science is always there. You can't do any of this without the hard marine science, physical and biological. But this idea of, boy, how do we, and how this kind of started, it'll be a little glib, was a small platoon of Brown University graduates who chased us down robotics and computer science. They had the world in front of them. And I think the first person who spoke was, I'm from Iowa. I read about the ocean. I don't want to work for Facebook. What do you got? So that's so here you could see this definition of blue tech is very broad on purpose, and it touches, including life science, right? For aquaculture and others, it is, and AI, buzzy tech, robotics, even on the finance side, fintech. How do you finance these projects? So we purposely wanted to say, it's like, look, it's actually a huge ocean. There's a pun, right? So that's our thesis, at least from a See Ahead perspective. We wanted to go as wide as we could, where basically everybody almost could feel you have a stake in this. Mike, should I talk about this? We'll hold off on this.
No, I think you can.
Okay, all right. This slide, I think maybe Laine, you did this slide. This summer, you recognize it. So, my background, I've done mostly clean tech and now blue tech on the venture side. We led the angel investment in Atrix. So excited, it's right by the airport. That's how I first met Matt. But maybe unlike a lot of venture, sustainability focused venture people, I've also done public sector work. And from that side is bringing this ethos of this concept called an economic cluster. And long story short is what's a cluster? Silicon Valley is a tech cluster. New York City is a finance media cluster. LA is a media cluster. Boston's a life science cluster. RTP is a life science cluster. So the idea of a cluster is that all the pieces of a region, 1 + 1 + 1 is 5. If you don't have a cluster, 1 + 1 + 1 is 2. Right. So first you start with an assessment. Could we be a blue economy, blue tech economic cluster? So the first step of asking that question to yourself is just, well, let's just lay out the core assets. And this goes back to this is not everything, of course, but it's pretty impressive is that let's just go back to Morehead City and Beaufort. There's the 3 R1 universities, one led by Joel, right? Have their marine labs. Duke's is up the street, and IMS is right next to CMAS, NC State. Then you got Carteret Community College. You got NOAA. Probably others, but that's all within 10 miles. Farther north, over the Outer Banks, CSI, which many of the schools are also affiliated with. That's led by ECU, and then UNCW has at least 2, maybe 3 marine labs. I've only been to 1 so far. That by itself is awesome, but you can make an argument that other places have marine labs too, from their perspective. So what Laine and us were thinking about this summer was like, well, what if we connected to where we're sitting down represents, the research triangle, just a lot of leadership in the world on research in those sectors that in a prior slide, where you have a lot of researchers who get up in the morning and don't necessarily say, I'm an ocean person. So if we were able to connect those two, then we call it, it's a lack of a term. If you can come up with a better term, we call it a blue dumbbell. The idea, and this idea is maybe we can have a cluster with some effort where 1 + 1 research and the coast. We can marry the marine science and the infrastructure with a lot of R1 research across the board. For us, that could be 1 + 1 is 3. That a good?
That's awesome.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
Mark, it's a blue triangle.
Yes.
It's not a research triangle, it's a blue triangle.
Yeah, it is.
I like that. It's like, yeah, the dumbbell isn't resonating well. People don't like it.
Insult. So thank you, Mark. That was great. And we'll hold on with questions at the end and just get everyone else's perspective and try and bring it all together. But Joel, if you would start just when you moved out so you could see Mark's slides and understand more about the way he thinks. I know you all talked in the past when he visited IMS, but you are a really successful problem-solving marine ecologist. And so you are the person who would be generating, the type of person who would be generating the intellectual property that would fuel this cluster. But you're also the director of an institute, which would potentially serve a big role as a test bed for all the things that people might be coming up with in other places that don't have the good fortune to be right on the coast. Could you just talk about, for everyone's benefit, kind of the arc of your career, how you started off, kinds of things you do, and then wrap up with where you think this might feed into your perception of the opportunity that Mark's described for North Carolina and really beyond.
Okay. And if I don't land the plane, just help me find the right way. So, one thing that I was thinking about when I saw this is that if you think about just North Carolina's 20 coastal counties, and you were to look at the current leading employer in each of those counties, it's almost always a school system, a hospital, Walmart. We don't currently have Ford Motor Company. We don't have Amazon that's probably going to set up a distribution center at the coast. But there is this space, whether it's fisheries or aquaculture or other novel coastal protection strategies. I think those are needs. Those are great needs to have the types of jobs that would bring people to the coast. And there's probably an opportunity, if you don't know, we're linking an interstate between the triangle and our neck of the woods. And I view that as an opportunity to further the ties between the triangle and what we do at the Coastal Lab. I am at heart what might be called a mud and bucket ecologist, pretty not tech. But invariably, the things that we care about run into, very multidisciplinary challenges. So I'm involved in fisheries, and again, just cut me off if I wonder. But if you don't know, like right now, as of 2 weeks from now, the state is moving to a new model of reporting. There is going to be a much greater requirement to report catches on the commercial side and the recreational side. And the point is, we don't have the tools currently to capture those data, I think, in an effective, efficient way. If any of you are app developers, we are still probably looking for someone to get engaged in that space and to create the app that would actually be valuable to fishermen so they want to report. Right now, I think it's like a kind of dumbed down Qualtrics survey that's bulky and not fun to use. I do a lot of habitat stuff. We currently don't have great inventories of habitats across the state like seagrass, right? So this is underwater grass and stuff. And so there's an opportunity for someone to come along and develop the glider or the remote sensing to help us do basic things like map grass. I mean, here we are decades after having these places, and sort of the fundamentals still require, I think, improved technology to help us answer those fundamentals. So pretty much everywhere I turn, I'm interested in seagrass restoration. We don't have a way to plant seeds underwater in mass. And so we've linked up with a company called ReefGen. They have a device called the Grasshopper. It's a robot that can go around and plant seeds. And they're in their early stages of trying to figure out how to do it. They need test cases. So we're trying to do seagrass restoration. They're trying to improve their robot. So last year and this year, we linked up to see if we could help them improve their device. And I feel great about that. To do these things at scale, we probably can't depend upon me and you being out there doing this all day long with seeds. So these sorts of technologies are going to be part and parcel of large scale solutions. Maybe I'd stop there unless I've somehow missed it.
No, I don't think so. That's great. So Matt, if we could follow up with you, you mentioned being a serial entrepreneur and your experiences to date. If you could kind of walk us through what that looked like, what those companies were focused on, finish up with Oceans 2050 and this idea of emphasizing the role of blue tech and its connection as like a real estate asset seems fascinating to me. And all the while, as you go on your tour, if you could maybe mention things that you perceive as potential opportunities for students who might be interested in this space.
Yeah. So I grew up on the coast, so I knew I wanted to do something on the coast. And so when I got into college, I went to LSU for my undergrad and my master's. I was looking for something to get me out in the water, really. And so I stumbled upon coastal engineering and studied that. And as I was graduating, there was just a lot of focus, especially in Louisiana, on the protection value of the wetlands and everything to New Orleans and the surrounding areas. So very much was interested in how can we use oysters and wetlands and other natural infrastructure, what we call nature-based solutions or living shorelines, different terms we give it, but how do we use these natural things as a coastal protection feature? And engineers don't really like biological things dealing with it. They like steel, concrete, things they can predict. So it was a little bit of an uphill battle. And the first company I started was actually when I was an undergraduate around these precast concrete units that we eventually called the oyster breaks that would form these interlocking structures, but provide lots of surface area for oysters and also provide the protection value that you would get from a breakwater. And that, I mean, as an undergraduate, I didn't really know what starting a company was like. I ended up starting this company. It was more of a IP holding company, and So a lot of contracts and things like that. But I continued to work as a consultant. So I worked for this small company. We had about 25 people represented by about 15 different countries. So I got to work all around the world doing this type of work. And what I saw is that everybody has the same problem. We're developing near the coast in the midst of these really biologically diverse ecosystems, and we're either destroying them or trying to control them, but no one was really able to work with them because they didn't understand them or understand how they could really maximize the value of these natural systems. So as I was working as an engineer, I was always looking to find ways to understand these systems, which brought me into things like remote sensing or looking at the talking to various ecologists and biologists about those ecosystems. And again, it's an uphill battle when you're dealing with that, or it has been in the past. There's been huge amount of momentum, but the predictability and the risk reductions, like everybody wants something that is firm, that they can put their budgets behind and everything else. So as I grew as an engineer and started to understand more about how these systems work, I started another company, which I basically gotten out of my consulting role and was gonna launch another company, and that was always scary because when you launch a company, you don't have any money coming in, and so with being married with two young babies, that was a scary time, but I believed that there was a big market there, and we would be able to do something, and that's when I came up with the concrete 3D printing technology, and it was really just I had done the concrete structures before, but I wanted something that provided for these ecosystems. Because remember, I'm learning more about how these things work, the benefits of complexity and various types of features within these that I wanted, and nothing out there could create it. So as a good engineer, I came up with my own way of doing it. And so we came up with it's called dry forming. So basically, we're able to create these concrete structures with lots of really naturalistic features. And through that, I actually ended up coming up here to North Carolina. I was in Austin, Texas at the time. Came up here because I had a friend who had a job at NC State, and he's like, "You're going to take a while to do this. Why don't you come up here and get your PhD?" So I came up, got my PhD at NC State, which is that other school. I don't know if you guys know. And a really good engineering program there too. And while I was doing that, I was able to really figure out how I was going to start this company. And so the skills that I needed programmers because it's a digital technology. I needed folks that had mechanical, electrical skills because it's a robot. And I was able to find that. I actually hired, the first people I hired were art students because I wanted it to look really good and they knew how to weld. So I had art students to help me build the first prototype. And in that, we ended up creating a company. Like Mark said, they were some of our first investors in the company, and we're able to grow it into a full-scale manufacturing company. We're sending pieces all over the world now. And the company now, we have it's very diverse. We have data scientists, because some of what we're doing, remember I talked about the remote sensing. So some of the technology we're using satellite data to track wetlands and how they're moving, and that's coming into play in many different forms, including carbon. We've got a big contract now where we're looking at the whole coastline of North Carolina and looking at these carbon-rich patches with wetlands and figuring out where the best place is to protect those to maximize returns. And through my work with Natrix, it brought me all over. And one of the places it brought me was Saudi Arabia. And I didn't know it at the time, but Saudi Arabia has pretty amazing corals. And there's a lot of development going on that coastline. And I was working on a project where they were wanting to restore some of the corals. Didn't actually end up doing the job for a number of reasons, but one of the things that came out of that is I met Alexandra Cousteau, which is a granddaughter of Jacques Cousteau. And they had started a nonprofit organization called Oceans 2050 with the idea that they were going to restore ocean abundance by 2050 in one human generation. And that really came about because she's her grandfather introduced the world to the ocean space through film and adventure. And her father, Philippe, saw these places that he was a child being destroyed, going away. And that's where he helped steer the Cousteau Society towards more conservation than just filmmaking. So Alexandra grew up in this, and she was continuing to see these ecosystems being destroyed, even in this conservation mindset. And so when it was kind of dramatic, but she was wondering, is my daughter going to be the one that writes the obituary for the ocean as the fourth generation Cousteaus in the space? And she met a man by the name of Carlos Duarte, who's a world-renowned marine scientist, and he had just published a paper in Nature called Rebuilding Marine Life. So it was talking about how do we rebuild these ecosystems. And he said, no, don't give up on it. We can rebuild these ecosystems. Tremendous effort needs to be put into this across large scales, but it can be done. So that was the birth of Oceans 2050. And from there, that's the nonprofit version. When I met her, I was really captivated by this audacious goal to rebuild the ocean by 2050. I mean, we're already 2025 now, so that's 25 years. We got to get busy. But they needed they needed to build it because they were generating the momentum and the social license to do this and lots of energy behind it, but they needed ways to build it. Well, I'm an engineer, and that's what I do. I build stuff. And so we've started a series of companies that are now going to complement this nonprofit in bringing all of this together and viewing what these projects could look like. And so the other part of being an entrepreneur is where there's challenge, there's also opportunity. And so how do we take a space like, for example, in Monroe County in the Keys, where the whole economy depends on fishing and tourism and everything else? How do you turn that into a project that gives all of that return on the investment that the county might have, but then also bring in outside capital that boosts the size of the project, all the while stimulating? And I'm thinking about what you have here, Mark. How do you stimulate that local economy by creating companies that are tailor built for those needs that are in that community around the space? And so it creates this virtuous cycle where you're not just rebuilding the environment in that community, you're building the community to sustain it. And so that's the most exciting thing that I feel like I've done in my career, because it's more holistic in the way that we're approaching this. And I think that as I'm seeing this, I'm happy to expand on it, but there's so many needs when I think about the students coming into this space, coming from different perspectives. When you look at it holistically, there's just lots of opportunity to get involved at various levels.
That's awesome. Thank you. Thank you. And thank you for getting to our theme of local focus, but global importance. I think that's so great that something as big as Oceans 2050 at the end is probably looking at Carteret County and trying to figure out how to make one of the bigger employees not be Walmart.
Yeah. Well, if I could just link these two together real quick. So living shorelines or nature-based solutions, like what a great place to be doing this. We do have the research. I might argue, I don't have data in my hands. North Carolina might lead the world in terms of sort of academics trying to publish about designs, the biological consequences of these different types of shoreline structures. There are nonprofits that are on here, I don't think. So we have great partners like the Coastal Fed, which they're massively successful in gaining resources and a wonderful group to work with in my experience. And then, all the sensors that we have to figure out how these different strategies might be designed or be optimized. So for instance, I would love really low cost wave attenuation devices. Like, how do we build a sensor that tells us, are these things actually attenuating waves? And these things are emerging, but they're still not as readily accessible. But I mean, if you're an engineering type, I mean, there's just all sorts of opportunities to get engaged in any of those types of activities. So that's just one example of these things that connect universities, probably finance, engineering, nonprofits.
Yeah, I agree. So Laine, you started a little bit when you introduced yourself, talking about some of the perspectives that you gained when you worked with LongLeaf Studios over the summer. But would you like to add some more details and things that you saw, things that you might think would be of interest to students who could be interested in this realm or just wanting to learn about it?
Yeah, I'd love to. It's funny when Mark and his partner Lawson Carmichael would introduce my co-intern and I to industry players, I'd often joke that I was the only North Carolina native on the team, but I quickly came to realize that didn't mean much at all. Despite going to school and growing up in North Carolina my whole life, I had really no idea about the breadth of opportunities in blue tech and different industries we looked at. Um, um, I think going in, I had the misconception that blue tech was basically just these marine science applications way out in the ocean that I would never really be able to understand coming from my more social sciences policy background. But I think as our discussion today has started to reveal, and as you'll quickly find when you take a deeper dive, that blue tech is really a huge range of different sectors from aquaculture, coastal resilience, biotech, decarbonization, increasingly AI and data analytics. So I think that's the most exciting opportunity for students. This diversity creates so many opportunities across the entire value chain. And in my experience at UNC, especially comparing it to my classes in public policy, students in the Institute for the Environment are unique in that there is such a wide array of different interests, from those who are more interested in the hard sciences to the GIS masters to people like me who are a little more interested in the policy and the social sciences. And I think a lot of us don't realize that Blue Tech offers opportunities for students to pursue all these passions and in different ways. So, for example, if I was a student interested in coastal resilience policy, I could work with a startup like Natrix, helping them understand how their product could benefit from government subsidization or things like that. Or a more numbers-oriented student could work with Fathom Science, a startup out of Raleigh that Mark works with that uses AI tools to create insights from ocean data. And these are just two like super quick examples that I saw of different opportunities in this space, but also that are right next door in the research triangle, or the blue triangle as we're now calling it. So I think that is my biggest takeaway. But I will end with one piece of advice for any students that still have the pleasure of a few more years at UNC. And I think that's just to take full advantage of the resources that are present at UNCIE. I've had wonderful, eye-opening experiences most recently through the Pavel Molchanov Scholars Program, but I also participated in the Sustainable Triangle Field Site, as well as an Eco Studio internship with Orange County. And I cannot imagine my Carolina experience without these opportunities. I've also heard great things about the coastal field sites as well. So I think they're an incredible resource and offer so many different opportunities, again, to students with this diverse range of interests. And I'd be happy to answer any further questions on those programs or give my experience.
Thank you, Laine, for that uncompensated endorsement. Undergraduates. We've loved having you be part of so many parts of the things that we support and what we try to do, which is elevate the undergraduate experience of undergraduates throughout the university, not in any particular department. So again, I will say, keep your eyes open in this space for future opportunities. But Laine, you provided some great examples. I think it'd be interesting to just go through the panel and what do you think are some emerging opportunities that are likely to be things that we focus on in North Carolina that will not only be issues that we face as a society, but have a potential for becoming part of having a blue tech solution and being a growing part of the blue economy.
Sure. So, yeah, closer to home and maybe even just the last year, like Helene, I didn't expect Chantel. I live in Chapel Hill. I mean, I was driving towards NC State that next morning, and someone said, half of the Chapel Hill is flooded, and then there's the coastal resiliency and erosion, and so these are local, but they're global, right? So, Laine briefly mentioned like Fathom Science is one that does met-ocean modeling. They're integrating those two data sets. And the argument from them is like, it's nice if you started with an oceanographer, right? But there's just, and then Matrix is the physical as well as the mapping and the planning. So there's a multitude of different technologies. And if we were a cluster, that we could maybe come up with better predictive models throughout the word AI, Buzzy, where I think all of us got, if you lived in Orange County that night in Chantel, you just got a Amber Alert, like the whole county, don't go out. And we all mostly ignore it, right? And it was fatal for some, right? So that's an example of what we call the high-low is, hey, we have the capabilities of this ecosystem to tackle some of our own problems around climate related to the ocean, extreme weather. And by the way, the world will care about that. So why don't we develop it here? So that's something we've been trying to get off the ground is, will the insurance companies pay for it or fund some of the research working with the schools and some researchers, maybe startups, maybe NC Innovation, right?
Awesome. Joel, emerging areas.
Yeah, well, I'll probably just try to stay close to home, and it's in the fisheries realm. I don't know if any of y'all know this fellow named Tom Looney. He comes from tech. I think it was SAS, I believe, maybe. And he's like all in on aquaculture. I mean, he's just extremely passionate about aquaculture, right? Largely growing oysters and clams. North Carolina has a goal to have $100 million industry in the space the next decade or so. Although time is flying by, like 2050. And we have lots of needs. These farmers are doing this in a risky environment, and sometimes their crops die. And we think there are some biotech solutions to make those oysters more resilient. In the more wild fisheries, like the traditional fisheries, North Carolina is a top, perhaps 2 state in terms of recreational fishing activity. And we're a top 5 state in terms of commercial harvest. The point being is we do have this great resource. We have a big coast. We have a lot of people interested in the resource. We have growing populations. And the management is getting so-so outcomes. Part of the solution will be better monitoring, better data. We can't depend on better management being like just more nets in the water somehow counting fish. We need creative solutions. I mentioned the one about the reporting. But really just the integration of AI into how we understand the status of our fisheries. Like that's a brave new world. And so I see all sorts. I mean, yeah, no one's doing finfish aquaculture in this. Well, there's very, very little finfish aquaculture in this state. And so how do we develop the technologies to grow finfish either on land in big tanks or out in the water? And what monitoring do we need to look at downstream effects? So I feel like it's job security and that there's just like no end of ways to tackle this in the fishery space.
Matt, what are you seeing, particularly with your Big Oceans 2050 perspective, where you're looking at the whole globe?
Yeah, well, one of the interesting things that's happened since all the federal funding got cut was people realized we still have to do this work. And it has gone from more of a global perspective to a local perspective. And so now the locals are saying, well, maybe the guy in Kansas doesn't care about what's going on my coastline, but I care. And so how do we get this funded? So people are taking maybe smaller pots of money, but much more heavily invested. And as far as like personally invested in what that money's going into. But what that's produced is, well, if I put this amount of money in, I want to have more assurance that I'm getting a return on that investment. And so this idea of a return on investment is starting to crop up wherever people are wanting to do these projects, which goes back to how do you monitor this? How do you show this is having a positive effect? How do you look further into the future and say, what are going to be the likelihood of success 10, 15, 20 years from now if I invest there? So that type of technology and analysis is becoming way more important to these projects that are going through. And so that could be things like the fisheries measurements, the Doppler, and what you guys have been using.
People are using acoustic Doppler.
Acoustic Doppler with that. We also have a guy, so Mark, you mentioned people are not wanting to go work for Meta or Facebook or whatever, they wanted to come into the space. We're seeing that as well. In fact, we have a guy, he was the founder of Tesla's autopilot program, and just a brilliant guy, had $1 billion exit out of Tesla, but he's living on an island in Hawaii. He's like, I don't want to sit here. I want to do something worthwhile. How about the ocean? I love the ocean. So we've got him working on different cameras enabled with AI that can go for long term under the water and look at these different species. He has a whole community of people that are, because he can post it live, that are like looking at the fish and being able to train the AI kind of through a community network. So how do you create systems like that can help, count fish or show the improvements of these different systems? There's still a lot in the predictive capabilities. So when we think about, well, if we're going to do this bigger implementation, because sometimes we're working with sovereign nations or even, whole states, not just a single project, but a collection of projects, a master plan. How does that impact the overall abundance of the fisheries in that state? And I keep coming back to fisheries because it's overlooked, but do you guys have any idea how big the recreational fisheries is in North Carolina? This GDP into the state? It's like $200 million. That's not nothing, right? And so if you can show how something improves the fisheries in the state, the legislators are going to start to take notice and say, maybe we should invest more money into that, right?
And by some estimates, it scales to the billions. It just depends on what you count and the value. Like,
Yeah.
Recreational fishermen often get credit for the ice they buy and the boats they buy and the house they buy. So it's,
Yeah,
Yes.
the ice is probably legitimate.
Yeah.
The house, but in Florida is 13 billion, right? And so these end up being large numbers. And really, when you look at North Carolina itself, you look at the whole Outer Banks and everything else, it's environmental tourism. People go there because the environment is beautiful. They can enjoy being in these natural settings. If that goes away, so does that economy, right? And so framing things in these ways and implementing policy, a lot of what we're looking at is policies that were made for people to come in and build condos or ports or what have you that are going to destroy the environment. Everything goes through that regulation. But when we say, oh, we want to go recreate these natural settings, we're going through that same permitting framework, and it gets clogged up with all the things that really we want things to get clogged up in so that we're not overdeveloping. But in this case, we're behind the 8 ball, and so we're pushing against something, trying to rebuild in an atmosphere that's trying to prevent you from rebuilding. So there's a lot of policy that needs to be implemented to shift perspectives on that. Right now, the way that we're approaching that is just really grassroots. We get people excited about the projects that we're doing. We show how it's benefiting the community, and then rallying the community around these projects. And then that filters up to the legislatures and others. And then they start putting pressure down on the regulators to get these great projects through. But ideally, that would be done on a larger scale to where we can get these projects on a different track or, some way to do it. But I say all that because one of the biggest hindrances is policy, and regulation. And I hear that across the board. We were talking about it here in North Carolina, talking about it in Texas. It's everywhere. But that's a big need for people who understand the environment, but also understand environmental policy and are good communicators, really. A lot of these projects or, implementations. It's communicating with people, telling them the story, the truth of what's happening there, and convincing people to jump on the bandwagon instead of putting up roadblocks. But there's again a lot of opportunity in that space, and on the tech space, the data analytics, people that know how to handle big data, look at there's a lot of public data out there now. It's just how do you sort through that? How do you make sense out of it? Kind of going back to that predictive capability. If you can use AI and big data techniques to get some predictive capabilities, I think that there's an opportunity for that we're not fully leveraging at the moment.
Can I build on that?
Absolutely, please.
So, and actually, Laine, as well as what Joel said, is well, first on ReefGen is I think they're spinning out of Silicon Valley, Google, another example of tech,
Yeah, they are.
right? And that's great, but maybe using it is I haven't gone through maybe 6 cohorts of startups, including down in Mississippi. It starts with tech and science, and to Matt's point, it doesn't end there. The barrier, the impediment to commercialization is what Laine stated, is what we've seen these deep tech companies, they go out and then we ask them how they're doing 7 months later, and they're like, the regulator's looking at me and I got an advanced model, I got an advanced sensor, and he or she says, in order for me to give you permitting to get in the water, I do a wet soil sample and I send it to some university 9 months later. That is what we're calling monitor, reporting, and verifying, MRV. From a capacity building perspective, it is fragmented. It's not sexy. You don't see incubators and VCs talking about this, but it is a big impediment to why we're not getting solutions out in the water faster. And in a way, our view is that universities are ideal, right? Because you have all that skill set under one umbrella. And to Laine's point, this is policy, regulatory, permitting, project financing. And on the finance side, the weakness of this MRV also keeps the price of carbon on volunteer carbons low. And the joke I've made, you maybe heard me say this, is like nobody wants to end up on John Oliver. Remember that's whatever, 15 months ago with the forests, right? So what's happening is you're seeing corporates pull back on volunteer carbon credits because they're not sure if it's real or not, and they're not going to take a chance. So they're just not doing it. And it goes back to MRV. How do you validate this deep tech? And that goes back to policy process. So it's once again, I want to emphasize, it starts with science and tech, but that's not the reason why a lot of these technologies are not getting implemented.
Yeah, I think for me, it's worth underscoring Matt's framing that the policy, particularly at the coast, is necessary to stop the loss of the natural system, but getting it back is really hard because of the policies to protect the natural system. And we're seeing that Joel now owns an island. It's one that's donated to the Institute of Marine Sciences, and it's eroding fast. And I'm sure that just because you're a nice guy who does the right thing by the environment doesn't mean they're going to let you permit anything in an easy way. So we have lots of supporters of the Institute are really interested in, they have these commitments to natural features, whether it be for fishing or hunting, and they're eroding away, but it's very hard to do anything because the policies that we need to protect it are protecting it from restoration. So how can we work that out?
If you got another hour, we can have a conversation.
Yeah, then we'll become polarizing as we take sides on that one. So my last prepared question, we're going to do a quick round, and Laine, you kind of answered this. If you looking back at your recent experience, in your case, your current experience, Laine, as a student, what advice would you provide to the students in the room and watching for something else that you would have done or something that you did do that you were happy about beyond engaging with the Institute for the Environment, which I know was a great thing for so many reasons, but what else might you suggest?
I think I've had a great time, not to like keep bragging on you guys, but the different like more niche courses within that you can build out. I don't know if it's specifically the sustainability track and the way you guys have built that program, but I had a great time. I took a water resource management class. I took a sustainable textiles small seminar class where I spun my own yarn out of dog fur, and I can't I've told so many people that, and they're like, how is that part of your sustainability degree? And I'm like, you know what? I don't know, but it was a great experience, and I think those are also interesting ways that you're going to bring into the workforce, and say, I did this, I have this interesting experience in the classroom, but I'm curious how it can be translated to the real world, and it makes you more encouraged to look for these uh, job opportunities that I think coming into school, you, at least in my perspective, I had a narrow view of what I could achieve beyond graduation. And I think working with Mark and Lawson at LongLeaf, working with Orange County, um, it's just opened my worldview a lot. And I think hopefully it'll put me into somewhere where I have a fun job. I'm enjoying what I do, and I'm, applying these really interesting things I've done in the classroom.
Awesome. Mark, one piece of advice that you'd like to give to the future employees at LongLeaf Studio, something they could do as an undergraduate to help make them more competitive, broaden their perspective, all the things that Laine talked about.
Yeah, I think more I can add to what Laine had said is emphasizing the point. It's you don't have to be a marine scientist. You don't even have to have a technical degree, right? It's the problems are huge, and they're all different stakeholders and departments. So if you're passionate about wanting to work on the water and moving the needle on sustainability, you can pick your path. It's very broad. Just take advantage of being in a big university like Carolina. You're gonna have everything. Because once you get out in the real world, you're gonna.
Joel, same question.
Well, maybe to that broad statement. So again, I pride myself on being a basic ecologist a lot of times. We do applied things, but we try to leverage basic science to inform the applied. And I see Steve sitting back here. One of the more interesting things that I've been involved with was a plan for the state of North Carolina to grow its shellfish mariculture industry. And our lab happened to be the lab that was chiefly responsible for writing this plan that went to the state. And we had 21 recommendations, and none of them was ecology. It was all about how might you design a low interest loan program for these farmers? How do you properly insure the farmers? How do you deal with theft of product out on the water? How do you assess if North Carolina has a wide market for oysters? Or would you flood the industry with too many growers and then everybody's prices just drop? It was super interesting, and I didn't take those classes. I wish I'd been able to be more broad, and maybe I could have done a little better job. But it was just so interesting to get in that space between we're managing these resources, but we're also, and maybe in some ways even more so, we're managing people. And so if you lean towards the ecology, don't forget that people are a big part of that.
Yeah. No, I would agree with all of that. My path has definitely been circuitous. I didn't know where these different opportunities were going to lead. I was following my passions, and that led me to where I'm at now. And so I would say, the fastest way to get to where you want is not a straight line. It's probably going to wind and weave to get you the skills and the contacts and everything else that you need. So don't worry about that. I would say just relax into that. But I would also say, I'll start with a do stretch yourself and work those muscles of getting outside your comfort zone. Yes, you may be a marine ecologist, or you may be a accounting major, but get outside of your comfort zone, switch and talk to people from vastly different degrees and perspectives. And I think as you especially start to meet people that have similar interests but coming from different perspectives, you'll just see this really interesting gelling happening. And that's a pretty exciting thing to start happening in your career. And that really only works if you can get outside your comfort zones.
That's great. So now we have a couple minutes if there are questions in the room or online. Yes.
Hi, my name is Chris Takini. I'm a junior at the business school. And I have this generalized interest in sustainability because I took some sustainability courses this semester. And I was just wondering, what type of skills should I be trying to pick up the next year, year and a half before I enter the job market and try to go into this field?
I definitely think I know, but I'm gonna defer to,
No,
starting with Matt and Mark.
No, what do you mean, Mills?
yeah, Mark.
If you're already at the business school, the most, well, from my personal opinion, the most sleepy class, which you try and avoid normally, but I think the school is a good time to take it, is accounting.
I'm in it right now. I skipped accounting class to come
Yeah.
here.
I mean, everything else you can learn out in the field, but teach yourself accounting, I don't know, it's the language of business. Right, and what we're talking about, if you're gonna go into private sector and sustainability, it's still a business. Right, so I'm bringing on a second year MBA student. I won't name his name, but he's bored witless. And he can't wait. He's just like, I need to get out. I want to graduate. He's a CPA, and we critically need him at this point in the startup to get the company to the next level. Right, not another. We do need more marine scientists, but so if you're already at the business school, those kind of skills are good to knock off now.
Yeah, I would say communication. Prioritize that because if you do go into sustainability, you're gonna pick up a lot of different things, right? So we're talking about the blue economy here. If you really get into it, you're gonna get into logistics sustainability, into material sustainability, lots of different things. And if you want to be in a position where you're able to influence and be exposed to a lot of those, being able to communicate what you're learning about those other things to others is going to be a really, really valuable skill. And ChatGPT doesn't work.
I think any quantitative skills, modeling is so important, spatial analysis, GIS is such a great tool. And it does go back to communication, as Matt said, but if you can communicate a rigorous and robust message that doesn't rely on ChatGPT and that you can generate your own compelling, both spatial and kind of broadly analytical approach, I think that makes you super powerful because sustainability really only endures if it sustains in an economic sense as well.
Mm-hmm.
And so that business perspective, I think, would be a great head start. Other questions? If you haven't engaged with them yet, the ACES folks, the Ackerman Center for, yeah, they're fantastic. So it's a great resource. Any other questions in the room? Emily, do we have a way to look? Oh, yes.
I do have a question. Hi, my name is Amanda Ferreira. I'm a postdoc researcher in Brazil, but I do have a partnership with Professor Owen Dukawa from North Carolina State University, so I travel often to North Carolina. Thank you for the opportunity to learn about this blue carbon initiative. It's really, really nice. I work with soil biogeochemistry and blue carbon ecosystems. And I would like to know the perspectives on soil technologies, if you see any soils and sediments technology, since the most of the carbon in these ecosystems is stored in the soil.
I'm a biogeochemist, so I'm biased. I'm not going to answer. But Mark, what do you see as far as like, or maybe Matt as well?
I'm not the scientist.
Yeah, well,
But
yeah.
what I do see is very local is this carbon farm project in North Carolina. Like where you're re-wetting ag areas that have been drained and just doing the carbon math there. So no pain. And then it's interesting is they're generating carbon credit and have investors. Who would have thunk, you would think knee-jerk reaction that all that is all dead under this administration. You have in our here locally, land being restored back to its original and it's carbon positive, carbon fighting carbon, and someone's getting paid.
Yeah. So on that carbon farm, one of the technologies, because I think you were asking about the technologies as well, is the methane sensors. And those are extremely, they call them methane towers. They're extremely expensive because they're trying to calculate the whole carbon balance, right? So methane is counting against your credits. So if you know what that is, then you can manage the farm, but also properly account for the carbon in the system. But there's got to be other ways there are other ways of doing that. One is remote sensing. They're starting to look at how you can measure that through basically how the light is interacting with the methane. So that's one. We were doing some sensing using satellites of different soil types from the reflectance off of those, and then correlating that to carbon within the soil on the surface, not obviously not deeper. Although what we were learning is that the plants will modify their foliage based upon the amount of carbon deeper in the soils. And so that can be sensed through remote sensing as well. And then we're at Oceans 2050, we're working on some modeling using parameterized vegetation that will account for different growing conditions. So this is more predicting into the future and looking at how these different vegetations will grow in clusters and how the root mass especially will accumulate under different conditions, as well as the peat within there. And then having some predictive capability, if you were to build or restore a mangrove forest, for example, what might that look like in 20 years? So again, it's getting down to that resolution that you would be able to sell the credits, because anyone in that market needs some assurance that what they're putting into that is going to come out. Otherwise, you end up on John Hall.
Yeah, it just emphasize the same point again, right? So you got a real project that is decarbonization. You got advanced tech. You need you need the scientists to say is this working or not is the process. And then you need a process to validate that technology, because unless there's a I think that essentially you're talking about is $250,000. It blows a few, it's like a big blower, right? And it's about as analog as you can be. And then there's an army of techies who say, I could do that with a cheap sensor coming off of here. There's no process to validate that, right? That's where the policy and the regulatory. So it's a lot of good work up ahead. And then if you can get that done, that means more projects get done and you get a higher dollar per ton of carbon. Maybe you can move the needle a little more.
I think that's a really important point. The more certain you are about whatever you're doing, the more money it's worth. And that goes back to MRV. Not awesome, but it is the value proposition of a lot of Essex companies. All right, maybe one more, Brian.
I thought that, Matt, thanks for that. I thought it interesting thinking about real estate. I have a bit of a real estate background myself. And I think one of the things about real estate that's interesting is scarcity is important. And you're always trying to upgrade the highest and best use of the property. So are we prepared for the idea of putting commercial incentives involved to get the guy in Kansas interested in investing in the seagrass because we're going to put aquaculture there and like put fish farms like they have elsewhere? Is that something that's going to have an impact we need to be prepared for? Because I think there are going to be ancillary factors that will come along with that. Are we trying to conserve, or are we trying to like make it a growth resource?
So both. It's going to be. If I understand the question, I think I'm only getting to understand. It's complicated because if the water is public trust resource,
Right.
like we all own it. You own it. The person in Iowa owns it, the same as me who lives inside of it. And the managers, that policy part, they're very protective. And it really slows things down, sometimes for the positive, sometimes for the negative. I think maybe if it begins to intersect your question, there are creative people that are thinking about ocean zoning and how we might zone the ocean. And that's kind of a brave new world, but that could allow, intelligent, wind farms. That's a form of ocean zoning, right? You got to go out and figure out where, the military has needs, fishers have needs, whales have needs. Trying to cleverly design a zoning system in the ocean, I think, is not at its finish line. And that's going to be a part in trying to figure out how investors or anybody could engage in the space that's owned by all of us.
I think intensity is going to grow in some sense, right?
Well, it's not, right to your point, unfortunately, it's a growth market, right? What's the numbers in a tease about how much coastal resiliency, right, is going to be needed. Maybe using your question of not trying to be in that binary is Matt from Matrix. When we first looked at Matrix, 3 years ago, I remember I loved the due diligence. It was with, can I say Shell?
Yeah.
It was an oil company that needed to attenuate the waste because it was affecting their ops. The first question we asked is like, does it work? And the answer was yes. They were paying Matrix basically for an operating need. And then what we liked about it, what we wrote up, it was that later for the monitor reporting and verifying it's a carbon negative project, we might be able to get carbon credits.
Got it.
So it's like a sweetener on top of the fact is like, hey, somebody actually needs this to work today.
There's a fundamental business case there first,
Yes.
and then you're sort of maybe getting carbon credits or some other sort of.
Yeah, and if you think about real estate, I mean, anything, I mean, we say we buy a piece of property and then we develop it, but really we're just getting the rights to do something on that property that allows us to monetize it. You can apply that same principle to the ocean, where you can get the rights to an ocean bottom to monetize it in certain ways, right?
Right.
You may not get the ability to build a new island or something and put a resort on it, but you may be able to get the rights to build a seagrass farm that generates carbon credits from someplace else, or fisheries benefits for the local community, or protection benefits for the community behind it. And then you start stacking these aspects to it, and now you have enough money to actually build a very meaningful project.
Awesome. All right. Do we have questions online?
No.
Ask one more question.
Yep.
Well, in this sense, how do you see the carbon credits attached to the biodiversity credits? Because it's something that it could be enhanced to monetize the ocean.
Yeah, it's definitely something that we're tracking. I think that the carbon credits, unfortunately, have taken a nosedive, and they're continuing to take a nosedive. You saw recently Bill Gates was like backing off on carbon credits, which was really surprising to me. But I think what is happening is because of this global to local phenomenon that's happening, people are not as excited about putting carbon in the ground or whatever they're doing to get rid of that to benefit someone somewhere, right? People are more psychologically attuned to what's going on in their immediate surroundings. And so the biodiversity credits seem to be much more appealing from that perspective because you're doing something real that has a tangible benefit that you can see, right? The problem with that is, how do you quantify it? And that's going to be really, really challenging. And there are people that are trying to tackle that through various means, but it's not, there's no consensus on how to credit that. There are other ways that people are doing essentially the same thing, where they'll put things into conservation easements and they can get things like tax breaks if they do that. So we're working on a project now where this guy could develop an island and put $100 million resort onto it, but he's choosing to put it in conservation easement, which means he can get tax credits for not doing that development, but then it allows him to actually do these environmental projects on the site and probably save himself a whole lot of taxes into the future. So there are different ways to do that. It's just the crediting itself, I think, is probably a long way off actually developing into a market.
Awesome. Well, thank you, everybody. I appreciate everyone coming. If you didn't have lunch, have another if you did, and have that outside. Thank you so much, Stephanie, for all your organizational work on this. Thank you, Laine.
Thank you for having me. It was great.
We haven't asked you our favorite question. What time is it there?
It's 6:15 p.m.
All right. Well, we closed the shades so you wouldn't feel sad that it's glorious here in Chapel.